What is going on, guys? It's your boy GS Luke here with our round 3 live stream for the API. Going to get you ready for all of your exposure for moving day with a look at the weather report. Any questions you have for me in the live chat, we'll go through some shots gained metrics, strategy, some contest selection out there for tomorrow, as well as we're putting together a lineup or two to show you the thought process when it comes to that. But by the end, you'll have all the info that you need to go out there, get your research started, and hopefully get into the positive ROI for tomorrow. Today ended up being a decent showdown day for myself. No real major sweats as I didn't have a lot of the good combinations going. I felt like I was always like 2 players off of having the nuts, but we did have a few people in my community go out there and have some near takedowns. A few people I saw on the SHIPIT Nation Discord also have quite a good day. So it feels like a lot of you took the information from yesterday and were able to turn that into a pretty solid performance. So if I can't have a takedown, the next best thing is for you guys to go out there and do so yourselves. So tip of the hat out there to everyone that was able to do so. I would actually tip my hat if I had my hat the right way. But let's get after it out here for tomorrow. They got Go Collect down there in the chat with some 2.5x ROI. Good stuff. That's always acceptable out there with the bankroll. What's going on, John? Let's get it. What's going on, Nick, as well? Which, by the way, I was sweating out that lineup out there with Nick. A very terrible run out. Very unlucky, I would say, over the last hour or so. But nonetheless, a whole lot of fun to sweat that out with you. And like you said, let's run it back out there for tomorrow. I appreciate the dedication, Gibbo. You tuning in while you're in traffic. I've got to say podcast, YouTube videos while I was driving in traffic. Always something that I try to do. We got Hart down there as well. Always great to see you down there. Catching them live on the treadmill at gym. Hey, another sweaty tryhard, literally and figuratively over there on the treadmill. That is good stuff. We got Ross down there as well. Look at that, 4x ROI, solid week-long cooking too. A lot of good vibes down there in the live chat. So let's go ahead and hop on in. But first off, a look at this golf course from today. So golf course today played slightly easier as the day went on, which was kind of to be expected, right? We mentioned the impact of those cooler temperatures, but the wind was pretty constant throughout. So if we go up here to the observed weather in Bay Hill, you'll see that at points there was slight little upticks in the wind. Heck, from 9 to 10 a.m. it went to about 6 miles an hour sustained. You can see at 1 p.m. it went to about 8 miles an hour, and then suspiciously about 4 to 6 it was expected to kick up a little bit. You saw it do the same thing. So this little split in terms of the averages, that could have easily been noise out there between the two waves. But tomorrow I think you're going to see a slightly different dynamic. So when we get to the forecast, we'll obviously mention what I think will happen with the weather. But today, it played slightly easier in the afternoon. Now, if we take a look at the forecast for tomorrow, it doesn't look that different than what you had for today, except that in the PM, the winds do look a little bit more significant, and especially out there in the last few hours. About 3 p.m. local time, the winds kick up to about 9-10 miles an hour sustained. And this is the HRRR forecast, of course, and those wind gusts, they go from in the single digits out there until about 2-3 p.m. to 14 to 15, even 17 miles an hour there towards 3 p.m., which could certainly go out there and impact play. And because tee times are twosomes off of hole number 1, and they decided to push back the start of tee times, it makes an interesting dynamic when it comes to the strategy, because your first tee time is at 9:20. That is just under 2 hours later than what you had for the first few rounds, but your last tee time is still there at 1:50. So these guys going off at 1:50, let's assume they have about a 4-hour pace. They're going to be playing 2/3 of their rounds, maybe even a little bit more than that, out there in these more blustery conditions. So I would say that the later tee time that you have, maybe a slight disadvantage out there to the last, let's say, like 6-7 groups. So the whole way back until like the guys here at like 12:30, maybe a slight disadvantage for these players, but these are also the guys that are in form. This is your top end of the leaderboard. So I don't think you have to fade all these guys at the top. And coincidentally, not only are they the best form players, but they're also your chalk over there for Showdown. The guys at the top end of the leaderboard, your top 5, top 10, are usually going to get the most ownership out there in DFS. So this portion of the board, I would just be a little bit picky with who you're going out there and playing, unless you're completely sold on their shots gained metrics. You really like how they set up out there for tomorrow. you might want to think twice about playing these sort of players if the wind really does start cranking later on. Now, I'm going to be keeping an eye on this as the day goes on. I'm still going to have guys, full transparency, that are towards the latter half of tee times, but I'm not going to be playing a whole lot of that chalk. Assuming and if you looked at today's averages, right, we said the PM played a little bit easier. That's not what the kind of wind that they're calling for tomorrow. So I just think it's going to play a little bit differently. And if people are looking at those round 2 averages and going out there and jamming in all of that chalk, it could make those higher owned players even higher owned than what they normally are, which would make them worse plays out there for GPPs. So that's why I'm being maybe slightly careful out there with the later players, especially if they're mid to lower tier players, 6, 7K guys. I'd be a little bit more worried about those sort of players than some of your studs there in the 8, 9, and 10K range. But I think the real sweet spot for going out there and finding guys would be this mid-tier range. And then, of course, your morning starters. Your morning starters going to be in some of the worst form of the guys that made it to the weekend, but they are going to be playing in lower winds for most of the day. So going back to the tee sheet, right, starting about 9:20, they're going off when it'll be 65 to 70 degrees already, and they're going to finish most of their rounds before those wind gusts and sustained winds start to become a little bit more of a problem. Now, I don't think it's a massive weather edge or anything, but these early starters are also the players that are generally lower owned. So, it's kind of like a double-edged sword here, right? Or maybe that's not the best word to use for it, but, there's multiple reasons for going after these mid to early starters. Not only perhaps slightly easier conditions, it's not just the wind, by the way, it's also the receptiveness of these greens. They are going to bake out as the day goes on. You saw that out there today a little bit. Now, it didn't impact the scoring enough to go out there and sway it towards the morning players, but Saturday, Sunday at this golf course, Bay Hill, right, it's infamous for getting crusty. It's the golf course where they kind of let it get to the edge when it comes to these course conditions. That's why some of these early players that are lower owned could be a really good idea to check out in DFS. So, if there's some mid to early, guys towards the top that you really want to go out there and mix in, feel free to do so sparingly. But where you're really going to win and lose the GPP, where you're going to move up those leaderboards when you get things right, are going to be with those guys that are teeing off a little bit earlier. We're going to go through the leaderboard now. We're also going to go through some shots gained metrics and how that'll impact our process for round number 3. So if you have any deep dives you guys want to do on specific players, feel free to go ahead and throw those down in the live chat. Now is the time to go ahead and do so. And what we're going to do together after we go through our first set of questions is talk about the round 2 stats. And just like we did over there for Thursday, I like to go through what we saw out there on the golf course, in particular with the approach play, some off the tee as well, ball striking always towards the top end of my importance, the top end of my checklist when it comes to what I'm looking for in players. And then we're going to look at some of the around the green and putting stats. And I'll mention why I'm looking at all these different categories when we get there and how you can use that out there to your advantage. So where we leave off. Your boy Dunlop got crushed today. Good call on Quaven. Yeah, definitely. You're right out there on both sides there. And the Quaven one at $6,000. It's definitely really nice for GPPs. You need a deep dive on McGreevy. Yeah, I know you need it because he's going off by himself, huh? So you always are a little bit curious about that sort of player. You're probably playing him no matter what. Just knowing how you like to play. He lost 3 strokes around the green. I don't think that's going to happen again. And he gained off the tee, gained on approach, was solid over there with the putter. Round number 1, I'm kind of curious about this too. So he also lost a bunch around the green. So that's 2 days in a row where he's actually lost 5 strokes around the green over the first 2 rounds. But the off the tee into the positive, he was slightly below the neutral mark over there on approach. This is the kind of stat profile where if you want a green light over there for the guy who's going off by himself, then sure. He's playing good enough to go out there and use for that sort of narrative. And he's going to be super low owned, like all of those guys going off early. So yeah, I know you're already going to use him out there in lineups, but stat wise, he's not the worst play on paper. It's like the great Jason Derulo says, he riding solo. Yep. I'm talking about McGreevy right there. 0% Scotty and week long. Should you lock him this weekend? I think that there's a good argument for doing that, especially because you're going to get him at the lowest ownership tomorrow. I think of any slate out here this weekend, at least in my projections, which I ran out here before the live stream, which, by the way, if you're part of my Patreon page, feel free to go ahead and follow along over there with that spreadsheet. But Scotty Scheffler, I've got it sub 25% ownership, which if you've seen my projections for, round 2, main slate, that sort of thing, that's significantly lower ownership than what we've had so far. So I think people seeing him struggle a little bit early in the round could keep that ownership lower. Salary has a lot to do with that as well. And like you asked, Nick, if you have 0% in week long, it's not a bad place to get some exposure because he sets up well stat-wise. And to show you exactly why I would say he sets up well stat-wise, he lost, you can see over the first 3 rounds, he's lost over 3 strokes putting. But today in particular, he lost 3 strokes in that category. So another guy that's due for a little bit of regression back to the mean. Don't know how you picked so many dudes who missed the cut. I had a bunch that missed the cut to Dennis, so don't feel too bad about it if you also had that happen. But I've also got some 6 of 6s, so hopefully you have a few going for yourself as well. Smash that like button, folks. You heard the guy. Go ahead and do so if you haven't already. What's going on, Michael Shalhoub? You said you got bent over today licking your chops. Yeah, hey, you're at the right place to look for a little bit of a bounce back, and we've got you. If you have any questions, dude, feel free to go ahead and let me know. But that's what this live stream's for, right? If you have any questions, we'll help you out with your process. Is ownership higher or lower in the $100 single entry versus the $5 that's 20 lotteries on relative to projections? That depends on the player grant, right? There are just going to be certain guys that are higher owned on average than what you have in the GPPs, and then there are going to be guys that are lower owned. What I'll say to give you a little bit of a rule of thumb is that the chalk in single entries tends to be a little bit chalkier. So if a guy's like 20% projected owned in the GPPs, he might be 25, maybe 30% owned out there in some single entries. If a player is a low owned diamond to the rough, normally he's a little bit lower owned out there in those single entries. And it's really easy to kind of understand why that would be the case. People tend to play tighter when they only have one lineup to work with, right? When you have 20 lineups, you'll throw some guys into your player pool that you maybe aren't completely sold on, but you go, hey, it's only in a few lineups, right? I'll go ahead and sprinkle them into lineups. You can't do that in a single entry. So people take those kind of players out of their player pool. And if you're willing to take a shot in the dark on a player or two, just know that you're going to have even more leverage in those sort of contests than what you're typically going to have. And that's not something that I just say out of nowhere, by the way. I used to do a live review of ownership after every single tournament. I used to go through my results on live stream, also the ownership projections that I had and what actually bared out in different contests. And what we noticed, I did it for like 6 months. It was very time consuming, and I was giving away too much of my process on there. It's why I had to stop doing it. People were starting to rip off some of the stuff that I was posting on there, like showing my projections, algorithm, that sort of thing. But what we noticed, it was those numbers, that trend that I just said, bared out with the numbers very clear. Like you took a look at the guys that were the chalk, they were 5 to 10% higher owned in almost every single case. What we also noticed in single entries, I guess something else to add on top of it, is that weather edges were played more in single entries as well. So if you had like a wave that had the advantage, let's say like the AM guys were the better side to play and all the content was pushing that out, and single entries, you had like a 5 to 10% bump in ownership on a lot of those players. So just, I guess, a few things to think about. I haven't mentioned it over here on the SHIPIT channel before, but definitely something on my channel and those review shows that we've noticed for quite some time. What's going on, Jose? Can you deep dive Burger, please? So ball striking looks really good out there in round number 2. So the deep dive in terms of the stats, round 1 was extremely ugly, pretty much lost across the board, only positive with the putter. But today did it in a much more sustainable fashion. He gained nearly 2 strokes off the tee, about 0.75 over there with his approach play, and then lost with the putter. So this is the kind of stat profile that reeks to me regression to the mean and in a good way. He's hitting the ball sustainably. Heading into this event, the ball striking was also what was carrying his game. So go out there, just putt a little bit better, maybe even have a spike round out there with the flat stick, and he could be cooking. So Shalhoub is here. Yes, Nick. We got the sheriff in town as well, Nick there. What's going on, Wayne? Morikawa is way overdue and seems like he's primed to win this week. He could. He's definitely overdue when it comes to the win because what has it been, like a year at this point? But we'll see. B. Hayes, who's getting the ownership boost with Scotty not as chalky? I'm gonna say check out my page, my Patreon, if you want to check that out, B. Hayes. But it's pretty spread out. But there are a few guys catching some steam. Can I deep dive Harmon? You're getting mixed reviews. So sure. So in terms of the round 2 stats, I'll bring those up right now. You can see he lost in the 2 ball striking categories, lost putting too. So really nothing great out there in round number 2, which was awesome because I faded him today on the prop side. So good stuff going out there and struggling towards the end. You can see in round 1, he gained across the board. And what I'll say about these stats is that his back 9 was horrible. His front 9 was great. His front 9 made a bunch of pars. Heck, that birdie he had at 3 was a long bomb putt that he went out there and made. He had the water ball at 11, which I celebrated because, of course, I had that bet against him, as I mentioned. But this whole back 9, he had makeable birdie putt after makeable birdie putt, and he couldn't make a thing. So Brian Harman for a few weeks now, so this isn't even just like a round 1, round 2 thing where he's not making a whole bunch of putts. He did have that one good putt, as I just mentioned. But last week, he also lost 4 strokes putting. And, Genesis was good. He gained over 4 strokes there, but he lost at Phoenix. He lost over there at the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am, just not putting like you'd expect Brian Harman to. So normally I would say, Brian Harman, he's going to rebound right out there in that category. I don't know if we can say that just based on how he's played recently. He's kind of off. Shalhoub not tilting yet. Yeah, I've seen him tilting a few times, but I've got to say, I'm a tilter myself, but I don't do it on Discord. I used to, like 2-3 years ago, I used to be like the biggest tilter ever on Discord. I was one of the most active members on there. Now I tilt on my own because I feel like it's healthier to do it on myself, not have to put it out there for everyone to see. And it's I do my fair share of it. Let's put it that way. Do I like Lover? So I think that I like the fact that he played really well to make the cut. He birdied his last 3 holes, if you guys didn't notice, to go out there and finish his round. Was also part of the reason that the cut ended up moving and holding over there at +4. He lost strokes putting today and then gained heavily over there with his iron play. So yeah, I think he's a really good play, especially with that momentum that he has going. But this putter has got to be better. If he's going to be an optimal play, we need him to be at least a neutral putter. And, he's shown us. Let's go back to the Lucas Glover profile here. If we go back to his last few starts over here and bet the number, I mean, you'll see that he's gained putting in quite a few events. You can see last event, Cognizant was into the positive. 3 strokes at Genesis, over 4.5 over there at the Pebble Beach Pro-Am. So he has shown that he's capable of doing that. So I think that he's a sneaky good play. What's going on, Dave? Thanks again, brother. Yeah, by the way, Dave, one of the guys that I saw have a near takedown today. So good stuff. And let's run it back for tomorrow. Did anyone happen to see what the 6 of 6 rate was? Yeah, Nick has it spot on. About 18% in most contests. It's your signature move. Yeah, dude. I was debating whether I should show this or not, but this is the results of tilting in the past. I don't know if you can see the screen there. I'll try and get it. It's cracked. You can see that. That was not me dropping the phone. That was me full on chucking the phone into my wall about a week ago. So trust me, the tilting happens. I don't do it on public spaces and social media. Like I said, it's a little bit healthier that way, I feel like. Did Finau find something on his back 9, or was he just luck sacking? Let's see if it was approach play. Let's see if it was off the tee play. If it was putting, not so much, but let's check it out. So he lost strokes putting today and gained at the ball striking. I don't have the breakdown for the back 9 in particular, but yeah, it feels like it was the ball striking because, right, he was 3 over through his first 6 holes and then he got it going. Looks like a lot of darts out there for Tony Finau. So I think you're onto a good play there with Tony. And let me double check if I'm playing him or not. Yeah, I am. I'm using him out there in my lineups. About 15% owned over there in my projections. Seems like a damn good play. Scotty birdied 2 of his last 3 and he'll go off tomorrow. Yeah, I agree with that. I think he's going to go off. And yeah, I appreciate that you like the tilting from me. Tilters get each other, right? And I break golf clubs when I play too. So like I said, I have my way of tilting, and it's by destroying personal property, which is probably the worst way to tilt, but it's the way that I get it out. Whether it's breaking golf clubs, breaking phones, whatever the case may be. Watched my betting chat yesterday and made some underdog picks. Can't lay over 3.5 birdies was the heartbreaker. Yeah, I agree with you on that, Andy. Luckily, had a lot of other stuff that went our way, so I'm not that tilted about that. As long as I'll have other stuff that hits, usually makes up for it. But yeah, dude, but he had 3 birdies through his first 6 holes or something like that, then didn't make another one. Just a bad beat for sure. Is Benny Ann back? I think so. I played him this week, so I sure hope he can keep it going for the last few rounds. But stat-wise, it's been some decent ball striking stats. Today, he actually went out there and gained putting. round one, you can see gaining out there in the 2 ball striking categories, flipped the putter out there round 2. So I wouldn't say that he's back. I would say that he just had a really good putting day. And, with the kind of ball striking you'd expect from a Benny Yan, it's something that is going to make him shoot like -5, -6, right? He's not going to go out there, gain 3 strokes putting and shoot over par, right? He's the kind of guy when he catches a putter, watch out. You probably have to have him in DFS. Thomas says, do I ever give out prize picks, strokes, overs, and unders? Great question, Thomas. Not on this live stream, but I do that over there on my YouTube channel. So GS Luke DFS, if you don't already subscribe to me over there, that's on YouTube, Twitter, X. You can find me there. I'll be doing the prop and betting live stream at 10 p.m. Eastern tonight. So if that's your shtick, right over there on those 2 kind of sites, matchup bets, 3 balls. It'll be 2 balls for tomorrow because of how they have the tee times. Make sure to check out that live stream. So it'll be a little bit later on tonight. I've got some stuff to do over the next few hours. Some grocery shopping out there to buy some stuff for dinner. But yeah, I do that stuff a little bit later on. Luke sounds like calm isn't working for you anymore. No, I'm calm in like 99% of the stuff I do. But I'll say golf. No, not at all, and definitely not with the betting. Hey, I'm a tilter. Like I said, that's just how I am. Like Shaloub down there, it's how we work, right? Let's go through these shots gained metrics. So we went through all of your questions. Let's just touch on what we actually saw from the field. So in round number 2, here's some of the guys that striped it. Now, Pendrith didn't help him all that much. He lost all those strokes around the green and putting round number 1, and look at that. He did the same exact thing over there in round 2. So that's why he missed the cut. He did hit a lot of darts today at the very least, but didn't seem to matter when it came to the final score. But guys that are a little bit more in play would be players like a Lucas Glover. You can see there gaining over 2.5 strokes approach, then due for a little bit of putting regression, as we said before. But JT Poston, I'm going to keep pointing this out until it flips because it happened with Grazerman. And Grazerman was a player that we were tracking for quite a few showdown slates that was hitting the ball beautifully and just could not buy a putt for his life. And the reason why we were tracking it with Grazerman is that he's a world-class putter, right? One of the best putters that we have out there on tour. So you'd expect him at some point to go out there and have one of those 2-3 shots gained days. Now, JT Poston has been in a putting slump for how many events at this point? In fact, it's been all of 2025. Every single event this year, he's lost strokes on the greens. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 events at this point. And now he's on event number 7 and has lost strokes putting over the first few rounds. And on the flip side of things, his iron play has been the best that we've seen of his entire career. So just a really weird thing that's going on. And Denny McCarthy had this going on about a month ago as well. If you guys remember, we were also tracking a lot of Denny McCarthy. He was gaining ball striking, even gaining off the tee for a lot of these showdown rounds, but just could not get the ball into the hole. And what happened with Denny is when he figured it out, he went out there and had that nuclear round. And somebody like JT Poston, if he continues to hit the ball like he is has over the last month or so, he gains 3-4 shots gained putting, and that's that -5, -6 round right there. So he's the kind of guy that I'll be playing in showdown pretty much every single slate until we get that putter to flip because of the kind of upside that he brings to the table. Not everyone has that kind of spike round within him. And JT Poston has that within his range of outcomes, especially if he continues to hit it like he is. JJ Spawn also really hitting the ball well, but lost with the putter. Michael Kim did the same thing. Also, guys like Tommy Fleetwood. Fleetwood, though, lost nearly 3 strokes putting, so definitely due for a little bit of putting regression. Tony Finau, as we previously mentioned, another guy due for a little bit of a better putting day. Russell Henley, he didn't putt poorly today, but another guy who was really good from tee to green. If we take a look at the off the tee poppers, we can try and take a look at some of those players. Scotty Scheffler, even though he had a little bit of a sketchy iron day, you can see he gained over there off the tee. In fact, nearly 2.5 strokes. Sungjae Im, Daniel Berger, they really got into the positive there. Also, Will Zalatoris. Almost all these elite tier ball strikers that made the cut, in fact, like these top 4 off the tee guys, almost all those approach players that I just pointed out are out there in my player pool for tomorrow. And especially if they're not guys that are starting in the top 5, top 10. Now, there are a couple guys up there that I still am including in lineups, but the reason why I don't love the guys starting at the top isn't so much weather-based, it's ownership, right? They're all going to be the most popular players on the slate. I really like these off the tee poppers and approach poppers when they're guys that are like T33, guys that are going off a little bit earlier, if a weather edge is your sort of thing. And also they're going to give us a little bit more leverage if they go off. Now, I like to take a look at these putting and around the green stats as well. So guys that gained a bunch on the greens today, maybe not as likely to go out there and do so tomorrow. So a J-Day, a player that I'm not using in lineups, a Rory McIlroy, Straka, I'm excluding as well. In fact, all these guys up here that are up there well into the positive. In fact, if anyone that gained over like 2.5 shots gained putting, I'm just not using in lineups. And if you take a look at these around the green players, you can see a lot of the same. A lot of these guys towards the top end of the list are players that got a little bit lucky when it came to their short game. And it's not like they can't do it 2 days in a row. Like occasionally you'll get players that, have spike putting days 2 days in a row, but it's not something that happens very often. So, if you're counting on these guys to go out there and do that again, then you're probably making a mistake. Now, somebody like Colin Morikawa, right? Could he go out there and have a really good ball striking day again and then be like neutral with the short game and still have like an okay round? Sure, right? He could still shoot like -3, something like that, right? If he has that sort of day. But to get to a nuclear -5, -6, right? A slate breaking sort of performance, you need that short game to go your way. And that's why I avoid a lot of those kind of poppers. And if you take a look at the other side of it, the guys that lost a bunch around the green, they could be due for a little bit of regression back to the mean as well. So a McGreevy, guys like a Justin Rose, Will Zalatoris, could be due to chip the ball a little bit better tomorrow. And on the bottom end of the putting list as well. So there's where Scotty shows up. They've got Tommy Fleetwood, Lucas Glover, as we've already mentioned before, that I all think have a good chance to go out there and putt better for round 3. So that's how I use a lot of these shots gained metrics to my advantage. Of course, over there on the SHIPIT Nation site, right over here with their YouTube, they have the stone, which gives you even more metrics to go through, including your round 3 historical. So you can take a look at some of the guys that performed the best on moving day. You can take a look at the approach series, which helps you do a lot of what we just did with the approach stats and the putting stats even, to try and find guys that are due for some regression for you. So it's a little bit of a cheat sheet to help you find some of the players that rate out well statistically. Make sure to check out SHIPIT Nation, of course, over there for the stone. And even if you don't have the stone yet, right, you're still maybe new to DFS, you're just trying to, use the free tools out there, right? You've got sites like Data Golf that have the stats up there. You've got Bet the Number, right? If that's a database that you guys have access to, right? Just go out there, use those to your advantage, right? You don't have to have every single tool out there, especially if you're new to the industry. It's better to have the tools, right? Like SHIPIT Nation, great tool to have, right? If you're signing up, the stone, the absolute nuts. But if you don't have it yet, just make the best use of what you currently have. And, if you have some success and you really start to enjoy DFS and you want to add on top of that and make your process even better, right? That's when you sign up for sites like SHIPIT Nation, right? My site, my Patreon page, to go out there, get even more projections and insight onto these slates, and round out your process that way. But hey, if you're just starting, you don't have to have all of that, right? I like to be super transparent about that as well. If you're like brand new, this is your first ever slate, these kind of shots gained metrics are a really good place to start. Let's go through some contest selection. So we'll go through a few questions here in a second before we build a lineup together, but I do want to talk about some contest selection before we do the full deep dive. So in terms of contests, they look pretty similar to round 2. In fact, almost all these contests are about the same size. So this one, you can see it's a 4th to 1st place, $50K out of a $200K prize pool. That's your big 555 that you have there. Sorry, that's the big 25 that you're going through. We also have this big 555, which is 33% out there to first place. Let's get to the showdown tab so that we're only looking at the events for tomorrow. Let me see if they have that 18 max. So there's a $10 single entry. I'm looking for that $10 18 max. And here it is. So they didn't have this posted yesterday. At least I couldn't see it. Maybe it got posted after we went live. But this contest is the absolute nuts for a lot of you guys out there. It's 18 entries. It's $10 a pop. So it's $180 to go out there and max enter. And it's only 10% to first place, 10% of that out there to 10th place, which is an ideal payout structure if you're looking for something sustainable. So make sure to check that out if you guys haven't already. This contest here, especially if you're trying to multi-enter, is the absolute nuts for a new player. Like if you're brand new here, you're not entering $1,000 a slate, which is a lot of DFS players, right? That's why I mentioned the whole thing about being new, not having all these different sites and maybe feeling like overwhelmed on a slate like this. If you're brand new to it, don't feel like you have to enter $500 in lineups. Like that $180 right there gives you 18 whole lineups to work with. And even if you don't want to enter 18 lineups, maybe it's just one lineup that you're entering, you've got these $5 single entries. Like this is the 7.5K caddy single entry here. It's 10% to first place there, then 10% of that over there to 8th to 10th. So that's another really good payout structure. You've got the $12 single entries. You've got these $33 single entries. So you could go out there and enter too. There's a lot of different contests that you can go out there and enter. And what I like about these single entries is, look at this. This $33 one is also a 10%. And I don't think it's it's not quite a 10% out there to 10th, but a decent top end payout structure in most of these single entries. So just make sure you're entering a contest that kind of fits what you're entering. And the thing that you should avoid, the reason I mentioned this out there for some newer players is like this $5 contest. You may say like, oh, it's a $5 entry and I can win $10,000 if I go out there and win. But yeah, you're playing against 12,000 other people. This is a very top heavy contest. It's hard to have the absolute nuts when you're playing against 12,000 other entries, and you're playing against people like myself that I went out there, I won 50 max to this out there today. That's going to have 150 combinations to play against, and you might have like your 1 to 3 that you go out there and enter. That $15, or let's say that you were going to enter 3 of those out there in the big $25, go enter 7 or 8 lineups in the big $10 18 max, right? You maybe don't have to max enter the 18 max, but invest that way. Or maybe you only want to enter 1 lineup out there for tomorrow. Go with a single entry, right? Rather than one of those large field GPPs. If you're doing this for some fun and you want to keep it sustainable. Now, if you're just doing this as a lottery, you're like, oh, I just want to win first place. I don't care if I'm lighting my money on fire. Then maybe enter your 1 lineup out there into the big 5 or to big $25 contest. But know what you're doing, right? You essentially are lighting your money on fire if you're entering just 1 or 2 lineups out there into one of those sort of contests. So I know some of you guys watching this content may do that. And I put this out as a PSA to make sure that maybe you stop doing that going forward, right? If you're only going to be a couple lineup sort of guy, start thinking about single entries. And it doesn't have to be cash. I'm not telling you to be a nit. Go out there and just play ultra conservative, right? Just try and double up your money, but just playing some of the smaller field GPPs. We only have to beat a couple hundred other entries, and you're going to make your whole life a whole lot easier. I promise you that. Now, what we're going to do is actually build a couple lineups together, kind of give you guys an idea of what I'm thinking about when it comes to building lineups, which a lot of it's going to come down to ownership and maybe a little bit of weather as well. But let's catch up on chat before we do so. Smash a like button if you guys haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel, and let's have ourselves a moving day. But where did we leave off? Will JT be owned? So yeah, I've got him getting some ownership. I've got him a little bit over 20% over there in my projections. So I've got him lower owned than a Scotty and a Rory, a little bit higher owned than a Ludwig Aubert owned, but not the chalkiest up top. You said, nice, man. Thank you. What was the YouTube channel again? It is GSLukeDFS. And yeah, I will type it down in the chat for you. Super easy to find it. It's on all the different social channels. You can find it. Henley doubled down for round 3. That loser, Ropat. Yeah, Harris English. I agree with you there. He did play like a loser this week. Yeah, you can go with the double down. He played well today. I've got to say, him gaining a bunch putting can be a red flag, but I've seen worse plays. That's for sure. Thoughts on Matsuyama and Griffin, both lost with their irons, which is usually their strong suit. So yeah, they're flyer plays for me. Both, coincidentally, Kim, are a little bit lower owned. So I've got Ben Griffin at sub 10% ownership. So just to give you an idea there, yeah, sub 10% would be the best way to describe that. Again, I can't give you guys exact numbers as I've got to keep that behind the paywall for my Patreon members. But yeah, Hideki, I've got just a little bit over 10% ownership. And, you know, it might not sound super low owned, but I've got a Shane Lowry at about double that around him. I've got Tommy Fleetwood at higher ownership than Hideki, and that's despite Hideki having a better score than Tommy Fleetwood at this point. So I like Hideki. I'm playing him just for the full transparency side there. And a lot of it comes down to the upside, right? Kind of just hoping that he has a bounce back day. Thoughts on Rory? I have a ton in week long, and you want to play him tomorrow. Should you just hedge with Scotty since you have 0? So here's the issue I have with Rory. And yeah, I think the hedging with Scotty might be the best way to go about it. I played a bunch of Rory in week long. I bet Rory in week long. So it's really easy for me to say this, right? So I got to give you my perspective to show you why I kind of think this. But Rory today gained 3 strokes putting. That doesn't feel very sustainable out there from day to day. And he lost strokes over there with his irons. So for me, I'm not playing Rory McIlroy, right? I'm staying away from him because of that putting aspect. And because it's kind of a self-hedge. I can go out there and get over the field on some of those other players and play against what I have out there for my week-long stuff. So I'm doing that myself. So hopefully that answers your question. And Screw Decky, yeah, I know he let you down towards the end of today, but I'm jumping back on Nick. I think he'll be a little bit lower owned, and he might let me down too, for all we know. That's for damn sure. Let's build this lineup together now. So in terms of building a lineup, what I'm really thinking about when I'm going through these builds is mostly ownership, as I was just mentioning. So, when we're going through and we have a massive weather advantage, that's something we really want to lean into. But I'm more so worried about the game theory, and leaning into the game theory is going to give us some earlier tee times as well. So they're kind of going to go hand in hand here. So up top, I'm going to throw a Xander Schauffele into my lineup at $9,800. So I'm going with a leverage option right off the bat, right? T46. He's one of the first tee times of the day. In fact, what is he? The third group out over there at 940. If there's going to be a weather advantage, you've got Xander, who also hit the ball well today. So what I like about Xander would be the fact that he gained over there in the 2 ball striking categories, and then lost nearly 2 strokes around the green. Now, the putter did get hot, but it wasn't like it was carrying his game. It wasn't like it was 4 or 5 shots gained like you had with a few other players. Round number 1, he lost 3 strokes in that category. So he did have that huge bounce back. Hopefully he can keep that going out there for rounds 3 and 4. So let's start with a Xander out there. Our next man in, we can take a little bit of a chalkier player if we want to. So in fact, I'm going to throw in a Wyndham Clark there at $8,500. I'm also going to throw in a Will Zalatoris here at +3. So we've got one guy I'd classify as chalk. I've got Wyndham Clark at about 20%. But then you've got Schauffele, who's a pivot up top. You've got Zalatoris here, who's about average, if not slightly below the average ownership, over there towards the bottom end of the 8K range. And then now for our last 3 spots, as long as they're not all 3 pieces of chalk, we're going to be pretty good here with this lineup construction. So let's throw one more piece of chalk into this lineup, just so I can kind of show you guys how to handle getting around that chalk. So let's throw in a Russell Henley because he will get some ownership out there in GPPs. I guess just PSA there, he's not my favorite play for tomorrow. So in fact, I'm 99% sure, not using him out there in lineups, but let's throw him in there just for the sake of kind of going through the ownership. At 7,400 remaining per player, let's throw in a Daniel Berger there at +3. Really good approach stats over there for today. Your last man in here, as long as it's not, a 15, 20% owned player, you're going to be fine when it comes to your lineup construction because you've got a pivot up top. You've got another pivot in Zalatoris, also Berger, who is about average to maybe, slightly above average ownership there towards the top end of the 7K range. And then you've got your 2 guys with some ownership. As long as you have like 3 pivots out there in the lineup, you can go with 4 pivots if you want to out there in GPPs just to get even more leverage out there in your lineup. But if you have at least 3 of them, you're going to be solid. And considering that you'd have to leave $100 on the table to round out this lineup, and I think the highest owned player here would be Justin Rose, and I've got him a little bit over 10% projected owned in my projections. Pretty much no matter who you played here, you'd be fine over here with this combination of 5. So what I do this to show you isn't to build a lineup for you. Again, there are guys in this lineup that I don't even have in my player pool for tomorrow. This is just a thought exercise to show you what you should be thinking about. But in large field GPPs, the big $5, big $25, you have to be thinking about beating 10 to 12,000 other entries. And doing so requires you to take stands against the rest of the field. Now, if you were in a single entry, maybe you don't worry about the ownership as much. Maybe that's where you go, I'm going to play Scotty up top there at $12,000 because even though he's going to be nearly 30% owned, it's a single entry. I only have to beat a couple hundred entries. Like, I'm okay with that being the case. Let's throw in Tommy Fleetwood there. He'll be a little bit of a pivot there at $9,000. Let's throw in Zalatoris again, I guess, over there at $8,000. Now we've got 3 players remaining here, but because this is a single entry, we don't really care about the ownership as much. So we're just kind of trying to find the best place. So let's throw in a JJ Spawn because of how his irons have looked. Let's throw in a Poston as well because he has that iron form and some potential putting regression. And your last man in here, even if you took the 10% owned Justin Rose, totally fine, more than fine over there in single entries because you don't need to have nearly as much leverage as what you have in those large field GPPs. So that's kind of the mindset shift out there between those 2 different contests. And then, of course, over there for cash contests, you're just trying to optimize based on projection. So just make sure that your lineup construction mirrors the kind of contest that you're going out there and entering, and that you're not just entering GPP lineups into every single contest that you reserve, because, depending on how many people you're playing against, the payout structure of the contest that you're playing in, you should be changing your strategy accordingly to go out there and have the best ROI. So that's all I've got over here for the round 3 live stream, though. We're going to go over any last second questions if there are any down there in the live chat. But if not, I appreciate everyone showing all the love over here on the SHIPIT Nation channel. If you haven't already smashed the like button, what are you jabronis waiting for? Go ahead and do so if you haven't already. And also subscribe so we can get over 10,000 subscribers. As I last checked, we were just under that mark. We may have actually gone over 10K since the last time that I checked, but let's pump up those numbers. And it also makes sure that you don't miss any of the content to come. That'll, of course, include our round 4 live stream, which will be later on this week. In fact, tomorrow evening, as well as DGen's emergency stream tomorrow week as well. So make sure to subscribe. Let me see if there's any last second questions. And if not, we're going to hop on out of here. You're waiting for Sunday Yellow Decky. There is something to that. He usually plays pretty well on Sundays. And then thoughts on guys playing later who played good round 1. So I'm not sure if the playing good round 1 thing really has that much correlation for round 3 showdown. But yeah, playing guys that are going off later, I'm not against it, Ryan. Like, the guys going off later, you could have 1 or 2 of them out there in lineups. It's mostly the ownership. That's the problem for me. You're going with some Denny McCarthy. Okay, I'll remember that, Max. Hopefully he goes off for you. And of course, DCC, best of luck over there with your exposure. But that's all, guys. Gonna hop on out of here. I've got some shopping to go out there and do. Let's see some takedowns in the community. Best of luck with everything, and we'll rally back out there for the final round.